Hello, Daniel Deudney. Welcome to my show. How are you?
I'm good. Sorry for the mix-up about time.
No problem. No problem. Okay.
So my name is pronounced Deudney, as in hey dude, and knee as in leg joint. Deudney.
Great. Hello there, dude. Me. Well, as you understand, I read your book. This Dark Skies, Space Expansionism, Planetary Geopolitics, and the Ends of Humanity. So let's get to the book later. First, I see you have this really impressive academic background, but what brought you into this really like strange topic of space politics? Do you have like any special memories or something that got you there?
Yeah, I was very much a product of the high days of the first space age during the Apollo period. My father had been in the Air Force and worked for an aerospace contractor, and I followed it avidly. But I think that, as with many others who are interested in this topic, science fiction played a role. I was a prodigious reader of science fiction as a kid, and so it all seemed, very real. And I remember reading kind of a pivotal moment in my overall intellectual development, a book by Arthur C. Clarke, Profiles of the Future. And it's all there, the bigger vision, not just in space, but with regard to computers, genetic engineering, mega infrastructures. And so that, for me, has always been my sort of horizon of future possibility. And during the 1980s, I guess I'm really dating myself now, right? I was a young activist and think tank researcher in Washington, working at the World Watch Institute, where I wrote a study and helped organize anti-space weapons activity, and then evolved into working on pro-cooperation in space activity, organizing workshops in the United States and the Soviet Union that were part of the conversations that led into the eventual International Space Station project. So I've been in and out of space my whole life, although, as you note from my day job, I'm a general international relations theorist. I work on what I refer to as the planetary problematique, and I bring political theory and international relations to these questions, writing about nuclear weapons, environment, and space. And if I were smart enough, I'd also write about cyber stuff. But I'm a planetary political theorist, would be the simple way to describe me. And of course, space, as the book demonstrates, is integrally part of this problematique.
Exactly. Wow, that's a really interesting introduction there. You mentioned like science fiction, Arthur C. Clarke, and most science fiction have a sort of optimistic approach towards space. Well, there's of course tons of science fiction, but the idea that technology will sort of develop and create a better world is like a premise in science fiction. Of course, there's dystopian horror stories also, but don't you agree that most early science fiction had this sort of optimistic approach?
Well, it was certainly optimistic with regard to the trajectory of technology. And of course, science fiction as a whole is a very poor guide to technological forecasting, because given what we understand the laws of nature to be, a lot of the activities that go on in science fiction will remain forever impossible, most notably travel faster than the speed of light or time travel. And space science fiction, is very, very key. It's a literary form, and it's a type of adventure story in most cases, where you've got heroes that confront crises and through heroic action save the day. And so, but as you point out, there's an interesting question about dystopia and utopia in science fiction. And virtually everyone who writes about space says that they got into the topic because of science fiction. But while science fiction portrays a lot of bad things potentially happening, often averted by heroic intervention, the negative scenarios just don't make it across the barrier into thinking about space futures by the advocates. It's a remarkably kind of scrubbed vision. And so that's really my writ, is to provide an impact assessment, to do a critical evaluation of the actual impacts to date and of the prospective impacts from the various projects that are proposed and that are slowly but surely becoming more feasible.
Exactly. So when I sort of read news today about space topics, there's lots of progress going on. There's like this new Chinese space station. There's lots of private space tourism. And as far as I can see it, it's like a general optimism around these topics. So what I like about your book is that it's sort of an antidote to this dominant techno-optimistic perspective, or maybe even agenda. So you're like sort of in this book describing the potential, of course, negative consequences of space technology or space exploration, expansionism. So how has this rather odd book against the norm been received in the academic and space exploration communities or scientific communities?
One never knows for sure. And of course, the book came out just as the pandemic lockdown was beginning. So there's been a lot of disruption. International relations theory, the professional world of political science, thinking about world politics, doesn't pay a great deal of attention to space. But the people that do, I think, see the book as at least in significant measure persuasive. As to the critics, as the advocates, the National Space Institute, the National Space Society is the largest citizen space organization in the United States, and they have an annual convention, which was all virtual this last year. And to their credit, they invited me to participate in a debate, an hour-long debate, with the founding chairman of the board of the organization. And then they had 2 subsequent hours in which they had 2 panels of people from the organization, many of them very accomplished careers in industry, think tanks, and the military. And they basically gave me criticisms. They attacked it. And 6 of the 8 were quite respectful. and all said that this is a major sort of landmark work, raising a debate, raising criticisms that have to be addressed, while the other two were completely hostile and dismissive. One of them actually said, everything in this book has been said before by smarter people, and which I found kind of amusing. I need to get that footnote. I missed that.
Yeah, because one of the famous quotes you do in your book is, when mankind moves out from the Earth into space, we carry our problems with us. That's Freeman
Yes.
Dyson from 1979, which is one of the quotes that I actually remember a smart person telling me about space, sort of the politics of space. So
yeah, but that Dyson quote, is exactly right. But it's interesting that Dyson's actual analysis of space doesn't really incorporate that insight at all. He's a full Promethean, accelerate in all directions.
Yeah, even if he sort of acknowledged that we will take the same problems, just put them into space.
Yeah, and of course, his view of problems on Earth is that they can all essentially be solved with technological advance. There's this underlying worldview that I, using common language, refer to as Prometheanism and technological optimism. And it's essentially that worldview that it generates all of these slanted expectations.
Exactly. Yeah. Although I totally like your book because it's so contrary, maybe. But one of the things, and it sort of starts with this quote about we just expand the same problems. In your book, you use the term geopolitics often, and sort of has this sort of Mackinder approach, which is the famous geopolitician or theorist. I haven't read your critiques, but I would think that that would be a part of the critique, that you're just taking the same geopolitical power distribution on Earth and just exporting it into space. And the critics would say that that is a too easy approach, because there is already so much international cooperation and technological exchange that it's like already sort of proven that your sort of security risks are not there, at least not for another several hundred years, of course, which is cool in your book that you look that far. But still, today, don't you sort of accept that critique, that it's pretty well regulated already? Or am I wrong?
Well, one of the key lines of argument in the book is that much of what's gone on in space and the most consequential impacts of space activity have to do with the nuclear revolution. That where you stand on the nuclear question is going to shape heavily, where you stand on the space question. And one of my key arguments is that space has been much more implicated in nuclear insecurity and vulnerability and danger than is recognized, because the ballistic missile is not normally thought of as a space weapon. It's not really treated as part of the space story. But I argue that ballistic missiles have to be considered space weapons because what they distinctively do, which is go very fast, depends upon a unique feature of the space environment, the vacuum. And so I argue that the biggest impact to date in terms of practical consequences has been to increase the danger of nuclear war. It was, after all, the Cuban Missile Crisis that was the most dangerous moment in human history. And I am of the view, I write on nuclear weapons extensively in other work, the danger of nuclear weapons has always been unacceptably high, and that it remains high. The arms control regime is unraveling. We're going backwards with regard to that. But in the final instance, one just has to make judgments. There are people who are deep experts on the nuclear question who don't worry about it, who think that deterrence has solved the problem. I think there are compelling reasons why that's not correct. But given the absence of our ability to test any of these propositions, after all, we haven't had a nuclear war, and so what can we really say about it? It's all hypotheticals and theory-deduced expectations. So that's on the nuclear question. On geopolitics, yes, the term geopolitics is one of my key theoretical frameworks, and I attempt to adjudicate between different space visions and expectations on the basis of scenarios generated by geopolitical theory. But I emphasize, there's a whole chapter on this, that I'm using what I refer to as full geopolitics. And that's a model that I developed in my other work, which is quite different in the sense that it's more expansive than the geopolitics of simple great power competition. So it integrates all of these insights, from general international relations theory, and as you were pointing out, does acknowledge, indeed, one of the main focal points of my work is republicanism, and the idea that we can have stable, mutually restraining political orders without having hierarchy, and that we can exit anarchy on a global scale without creating a hierarchical world government.
Exactly. This I'm coming back to that, and this is like really nice sort of political theories. But let me stop you there, because today, even today, and this is back to 1967, the first outer space treaty, United Nations sort of agreement from 67, and then there's this Moon Treaty from 1984, and several amendments or updates. And before you go into the future politics, how are these sort of existing laws, agreements on the use of space from commercial to military, how are these laws enforced, like current status on regulating space and enforcing these laws?
Well, like other international treaty-based regimes, there is no enforcement aside from the actions of the members of the regime. And the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 was actually a very precocious and very far-sighted measure. And it, of course, established a number of provisions. One of the most important is the free passage through orbital space, like the freedom of the seas. But it also had a provision preventing the appropriation of celestial bodies by sovereign states. And this is, a very odd treaty in that way, because typically the approach is to extend territorial sovereignty in any way we can. That's always the state's preference. And this was in part because neither the Soviet Union nor the United States knew who was going to get to the moon first. And therefore, they figured that they were running the risk that the other side would get there and claim it. And so they agreed to have no claims valid. Now, that's a provision that has become increasingly watered down with the United States and American industry in the lead. During the Obama administration, the United States law was changed to allow private entities to appropriate celestial materials. And that was seen as a very positive step by the space advocates. But we're now looking at the possibility of returning to the moon in more permanent ways. And the ideas of resource extraction seem to loom very large in the thinking of the advocates of this. And so the question of what kind of property regime is going to exist on the moon is now a central question. And it hasn't really received the level of attention. We're moving in a kind of default pattern towards a kind of first come, first serve, squatters' rights again, the same type of thing which has occurred, of course, so frequently on terrestrial frontiers.
Yes, this is sort of the basis of your analysis of the potential risks that we don't have the laws or the experience really to avoid another great war over resources. Yeah. I'm not sure. I remember I think you mentioned in your book like Liechtenstein or some really small state that the law of space in like for aircrafts, when a plane passes over your country, it's like your aerial lands. And this, wasn't it something about that Liechtenstein meant that they own space to all the way?
Yeah, ad coelum, to the heavens, is the Latin phrase for this. And of course, the Outer Space Treaty essentially negated all of those claims. Luxembourg, a small country, obviously in Europe, is become a hotbed of space licensing activities. Because, as with other domains, we're getting this race to the bottom, and they have an extremely permissive licensing regime. And so just like people put money in the Cayman Islands or Switzerland to escape tax laws, so too people are going to Luxembourg to gain minimal regulatory oversight.
On space activities.
On space activities, yeah.
Wow, that's pretty strange. I sent you an article about this Google satellite system. If I can find that.
Yes, there's basically now all of these constellations, they're referred to as, of extremely small satellites, not much larger than a mobile phone. And in fact, they use mobile phone technology as the sort of foundation of it, and putting up thousands of these satellites in very low Earth orbit to make internet access in remote areas. It remains to be seen whether the economics of this will pan out. It's not terribly expensive to do this. And indeed, one of the important recent developments is that the cost of putting mass into Earth orbit, access to space, has fallen roughly by close to an order of magnitude. And there's reason to believe that further reductions are on the horizon. And that's a very important development because the cost of accessing space has been really a bottleneck to date. In the 1960s, it cost $10,000 a pound, roughly, to put mass into orbit. And despite the space shuttle, which aimed to reduce the cost, it still cost roughly $10,000 a pound. And so changing that has enormous ramifications. It makes everything else cheaper. And there's been this gap between what advocates expected and advocated on the one hand, and what actually has occurred in space on the other hand. We had that kind of 25-year boom from the V2 to landing on the moon. And since then, until very recently, it's been a kind of slow upward plateau. But now we seem to be at a juncture where there's going to be another burst of activities. And no one is giving adequate attention to some key facts about this, the most important of which is that space around the Earth, I refer to this as the planet's astrosphere, has to be understood as part of the planet, and most importantly for thinking about human activities, this space is actually small in practical terms. While the volume is greater, the speeds are proportionately even greater, and so effective distance is reduced. And that means that we really have not a question of both and. We can do all these things. Instead, it's going to be a question significantly of either or. And this also has to do with the unique features of the space environment that people know, but are not registered in the frames of thinking because of these analogies about frontiers and oceans. When you go back and look, at the early expectations and visions, no one predicted space debris. And this general analogy of oceanic opening, like the early modern European exploration of the ocean, the space was going to be like that, is fundamentally misleading. And one way to put it is that half the satellites that have ever been launched, roughly, are still in orbit, most of them dead, non-functioning, some of them broken up, but half of them are still there. And they're whizzing around at extremely high velocities, which they have to be going that fast to stay in orbit. And we don't have anything like that in the ocean. What if half the ships that had ever plied the ocean were still on the surface, zipping around at high speeds, potentially colliding with things? Okay. That's what space is like.
Yeah, that's a funny analogy, or not funny, but it's like you have lots of historical analogies, like from Earth to space, and they are interesting to read, but I'm not always sure they are totally relevant. But your analogy there was awesome. As I mentioned, there's this, I think it's Starlink, that has put up 60 satellites, which is just a drop in the ocean. They got a permit to put up another 12,000 satellites. Another 30,000. So this is Bezos, Kuiper, and OneWeb and Starlink. So by the end of this year, there's like 100,000 new satellites, something like that. It's not a very scientific article, and that's on top of the existing space junk. So if you look at other technologies and how their life cycle management are done, it doesn't look good.
No,
So
it doesn't. And one of the features of these satellites is because they are in very low Earth orbit, which is where they have to be to do what they can potentially do because they don't have a lot of power generation. They're going to fall back into the atmosphere. They're not going to last that long. And this is another aspect of space that doesn't receive the attention that it deserves, which is the pollution of the atmosphere by objects returning to burn up in the atmosphere. And you get very fine particulate matter. And you like in the average cell phone, you have a lot of very exotic metals that basically get vaporized and are in the atmosphere. This is something that hasn't really been adequately investigated. And we also have rocket fuels, some of which produce significant pollutants. And the injection into the upper atmosphere of particulate matter and rocket exhaust could potentially have planetary implications. Once one starts doing these activities at scale, you see there's a scale effect.
Yeah, industrialization of space. But to sort of close this off, in your like politically scientific scenarios for the future of space, because it's inevitable, sort of. If it's inevitable, it's the natural trajectory of technological evolution. It's not a religion, it's facts. So but still we have to sort of analyze and prepare for the consequences. So you have this I'm not sure what to call it. It's like a political organization, negarchy, which I understand as sort of a distributed world government to restrain and sort of coordinate space activities. What's a reasonable development of this sort of political framework from the existing ones?
Well, negarchy is a term that I coined in my other work on republicanism, and it's intended to be capture the basic logic of political forms that are non-hierarchical and non-anarchical. So we have various negarchical political entities all around us. Liberal democracies, the European Union, are negarchical in the basic pattern of authority that characterizes them. And my general argument about the Earth's astrosphere, about the part of the of space that's dominated by the Earth's gravitational and magnetic fields, which I argue is really part of the planet. And the prospects and appeal of having negarchical arrangements is very high. We have many of the preconditions that would make that more feasible. And I'm using this geopolitical argument, and there's always this question about what level of determinism one is attempting to claim. And what I call mine is range determinism, not a particular outcome, but there is going to be a definite range of possibilities that are going to be favored or made harder. And so it doesn't tell us what's going to happen. It basically tells us what are the significant probabilities of being able to do various activities, arrangements politically. Let me give you an example. I make the argument in the book that a solar archipelago, this larger arrangement that would emerge if we had successful colonization of other bodies in the solar system, would be an anarchy that would be very prone to war, and that many negative consequences would ensue from that. And my critics, and this is particularly the folks in the British Interplanetary Society, who are very strong space expansionists and very sophisticated thinkers in many ways, they say, well, let's establish a world federal government on the Earth, and then let's extend that into the solar system. And if we do that, then we won't have the negative effects that I anticipate. And I consider that possibility. And I basically argue that the odds of being able to do that are extremely low, that the conditions are maximally adverse to doing that type of arrangement. So this is the type of argument that you get in geopolitics, in my sense of full geopolitics, that enables us to say, these outcomes are more likely, these outcomes will be more difficult. And I don't really think that one can do much more than that because of the freedom of agency and the contingency of events.
Yeah, and let's not overestimate international cooperation when you look at different climate policies. There's like lots of really different approaches to that question, but let's
that's right. You mentioned climate change.
Let's not start another
Okay.
debate, but yeah, it's sort of related. So yeah, great talking to you. I always like to close off with which three philosophers, thinkers, persons you would like to spend a weekend with. In your case, on the International Space Station.
Living ones
or dead.
Well, I'm always up for interacting with Socrates, certainly. Probably also Machiavelli, to add another angle. And then John Dewey, although I don't think that he would be much fun. I'm a Deweyan. I think that his book, The Public and Its Problems, is the most important work of 20th century liberal democratic political theory.
Wow, thank you. Machiavelli and Dewey, and on the International Space Station, trying to figure out how humanity will survive the next 1 million years.
I figured you'd get a good debate, and I could just sit and listen and take notes.
Yeah, well, great having you on the show. Thanks for the chat.
Thank you for having me.